In a quiet, unassuming town in the Midwest, life moved at a slow pace. The streets were lined with modest homes, and the air carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass. But beneath the seemingly idyllic surface lay deep-rooted tensions that had simmered for decades. The town's population was diverse, yet divisions ran thick along racial lines. For years, minority communities had complained about mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement, but their voices often went unheard. It was into this volatile mix that Marcus Davis arrived. Marcus was no ordinary investigator. As an African-American FBI agent, he had earned a reputation for his sharp mind and unwavering dedication to justice. His presence commanded respect, though it also stirred unease among those who preferred the status quo undisturbed. When reports of racially motivated hate crimes began surfacing in the town, the Bureau assigned Marcus to lead the investigation. He knew it wouldn't be easy. These cases always came with layers of complexity, but Marcus wasn't one to shy away from challenges. From the moment he stepped foot in the town, Marcus could feel the weight of scrutiny. Some residents welcomed him, hoping he would bring answers and relief. Others, however, eyed him with suspicion or outright hostility. Among them were members of the local police department, many of whom viewed Marcus as an outsider poking around where he didn't belong. They saw the federal government's involvement as an intrusion, a challenge to their authority. One officer in particular stood out, James Callahan. A veteran cop with over 2 decades on the force, Callahan prided himself on his tough demeanor and no-nonsense approach to policing. Over the years, whispers about his behavior had circulated, accusations of favoritism toward white residents and harsh treatment of minorities, but nothing ever stuck. To some, Callahan was a symbol of strength. To others, he represented everything wrong with the system. Callahan took an immediate dislike to Marcus. From the first briefing they attended together, Callahan made his feelings clear. He rolled his eyes when Marcus spoke, muttered under his breath during strategy sessions, and openly questioned the need for federal intervention. To Callahan, Marcus wasn't just another investigator, he was a threat. Someone who might expose secrets better left buried. Despite the tension, Marcus pressed on. His initial interviews with victims and witnesses painted a troubling picture. Stories emerged of late-night raids without warrants, excessive use of force, and arrests based on flimsy evidence, all targeting people of color. One woman recounted how officers had barged into her home while her children slept, claiming they were searching for stolen property. Nothing was found, but the trauma lingered. Another man described being pulled over repeatedly for minor infractions, each stop escalating until he feared for his safety. As Marcus pieced together the puzzle, patterns began to emerge. Certain officers appeared again and again in the accounts. Their names cropped up in complaints filed with internal affairs, yet none had faced serious consequences. It seemed there was a culture of impunity within the department, shielded by loyalty and silence. Determined to break through, Marcus decided to go undercover. Posing as a concerned citizen, he attended community meetings and listened to grievances firsthand. What he heard only strengthened his resolve, but working undercover came with risks. Marcus knew he couldn't trust anyone, not fully. Every interaction carried the potential for danger, especially when dealing with individuals like Callahan. The seasoned officer had developed a sixth sense for spotting troublemakers, and Marcus sensed that Callahan was watching him closely. Still, Marcus remained cautious, careful not to give anything away. The turning point came during a routine traffic stop. Marcus happened to drive past as Callahan pulled over a young black teenager for allegedly speeding. Curious and concerned, Marcus parked nearby and observed. The situation quickly escalated. Callahan barked orders, his tone aggressive and condescending. The teenager, visibly frightened, struggled to comply. Seeing the boy's distress, Marcus stepped out of his car and approached the scene. "Officer," Marcus said calmly, holding up his badge. "I'm with the FBI. Is there a problem here?" Callahan spun around, his face reddening with anger. "This doesn't concern you," he snapped. "Stay out of it." I'm just making sure everything is handled properly, Marcus replied evenly. The kid looked scared. He should be scared, Callahan shot back. Maybe if he followed the rules, he wouldn't have to worry. Their exchange grew more heated, drawing attention from passers-by. Callahan accused Marcus of interfering, while Marcus insisted he was simply ensuring fairness. By the time the encounter ended, both men walked away seething. For Marcus, it was further proof of the systemic issues plaguing the department. For Callahan, it was personal, a challenge to his authority that couldn't go unanswered. Back at the station, rumors swirled about Marcus's intentions. Some officers grumbled about federal interference, while others whispered warnings about crossing him. Callahan, meanwhile, stewed in private. He couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was digging too deep, uncovering truths that could destroy careers, including his own. In his mind, Marcus wasn't just an investigator, he was an enemy, and enemies needed to be dealt with. Little did either man know, fate was setting the stage for a confrontation that would change their lives and the town forever. As Marcus continued his investigation, the tension in the town grew thicker with each passing day. Every new piece of evidence he uncovered painted a clearer picture of corruption and abuse within the local police department. It wasn't just isolated incidents. It was systemic, a pattern so deeply ingrained that it seemed almost impossible to dismantle. But Marcus had seen worse, and he knew persistence was key. He refused to back down, even as resistance mounted from every corner. One of the first major breakthroughs came when Marcus discovered a cache of internal documents hidden away in an old filing cabinet at the station. These weren't digital files easily erased or altered. They were physical records, yellowed with age but damning in their details. They revealed years of misconduct, falsified reports, ignored complaints, and selective enforcement of laws based on race. One document listed dozens of names, officers involved in questionable activities, and Callahan's name appeared more than once. Marcus felt a mix of anger and sadness as he sifted through the papers. This wasn't just about statistics or policy violations. These were real people whose lives had been upended by unchecked power. A mother forced to raise her children alone after her husband was wrongfully imprisoned. A teenager haunted by nightmares after being brutalized during an arrest. Each story added weight to Marcus's mission, fueling his determination to see justice served. But sharing his findings wasn't easy. Marcus knew he couldn't trust everyone in the bureau, let alone the local authorities. So he took a calculated risk. Late one night, he anonymously sent copies of the documents to Internal Affairs, along with a detailed report outlining his concerns. He also reached out to a trusted journalist known for exposing corruption, hoping public pressure would force action where bureaucracy failed. It was a gamble. If anyone traced the leak back to him, his cover could be blown. But Marcus believed the stakes were too high to stay silent. Meanwhile, Callahan became increasingly agitated. Word spread quickly among the officers that someone was digging into their past, and suspicions naturally fell on Marcus. After all, he was the outsider asking uncomfortable questions and stirring up trouble. To Kellerman, this wasn't just professional rivalry. It was personal. He saw Marcus as a threat not only to his career but to the entire way of life he'd built over decades. In Callahan's mind, there was nothing wrong with how things worked in the town. If certain groups got targeted more often, well, maybe they deserved it. That's what he told himself to justify his actions. Callahan's frustration boiled over during a briefing at the station. Marcus presented some preliminary findings to the team, emphasizing the need for transparency and cooperation. As soon as Marcus finished speaking, Callahan slammed his fist on the table. "You think you're better than us?" he spat, glaring at Marcus. "You come here, waltz into our town, and start throwing accusations around like you know everything." Marcus kept his cool, though his jaw tightened slightly. "I'm not accusing anyone," he said evenly. "I'm presenting facts. If you've got nothing to hide, then there's no reason to worry. Facts? Facts don't mean squat if you twist them to fit your agenda," Callahan shot back. You're trying to ruin good cops who are just doing their jobs." The room fell silent as the other officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded in agreement with Callahan, while others looked away, unwilling to get dragged into the conflict. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he held Callahan's gaze, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "My job is to find the truth. If that makes people uncomfortable, so be it." After the meeting, Marcus noticed subtle changes in how he was treated. Officers who had previously been neutral now avoided eye contact or muttered insults under their breath. Even routine tasks became harder, as colleagues found excuses to delay handing over information or outright refuse to cooperate. Yet Marcus pressed on, driven by the knowledge that giving up meant abandoning those who had placed their trust in him. Despite the growing hostility, Marcus managed to make progress. Through careful questioning and building rapport with community members, he identified several key players in the conspiracy. There were whispers of secret meetings between rogue officers and members of white supremacist groups, discussions about intimidating minority residents and silencing dissent. Though the evidence was still circumstantial, Marcus felt he was closing in on something big. Late one evening, as Marcus pored over notes in his temporary office, his phone buzzed with an anonymous tip. The message was brief but intriguing. "Warehouse. On 5th Street, midnight tonight." No signature, no explanation. Marcus hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks. Anonymous tips were always tricky. They could lead to valuable intel or serve as traps. But something about this one felt different. The timing, the location, it aligned too perfectly with what he'd been uncovering. He decided to check it out. Armed with only non-lethal equipment per FBI protocol, Marcus drove to the address. The warehouse sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by empty fields and shrouded in darkness. As he approached, he noticed another car parked nearby, a patrol vehicle. His heart sank when he recognized the license plate. It belonged to Callahan. Inside the warehouse, Marcus moved cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. Shadows danced across the walls as he scanned the space. Empty crates and discarded machinery littered the floor, creating perfect hiding spots. Suddenly, voices echoed from a distant corner. Marcus crouched low, listening intently. Two men were arguing. One sounded desperate, the other furious. Though he couldn't make out the exact words, the tone suggested betrayal and mistrust. Before Marcus could move closer, footsteps echoed behind him. He turned quickly, raising his hands to signal he was unarmed. "Officer Callahan," he said, keeping his voice steady. "What are you doing here?" Callahan stepped into the light, his face twisted with rage. "I should ask you the same thing," he growled. "Sneaking around like a rat in the dark. What are you really up to, Davis?" "I'm investigating a credible lead," Marcus replied. "If you're here for the same reason, we should work together." "Work together?" Callahan laughed bitterly. "You think I'm stupid? You're trying to take us down one by one. Well, it stops here." Marcus tried to reason with him, holding up his badge again. "This isn't about taking anyone down. It's about finding the truth. If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to fear." But Callahan wasn't listening. His hand hovered near his holster, his eyes darting wildly. For a moment, Marcus thought he might walk away. Then, without warning, Callahan drew his weapon, pointing it directly at Marcus. "You had your chance," he snarled. "Now it's mine." Time seemed to slow as Marcus processed what was happening. He raised his hands higher, palms open. "Think about what you're doing," he urged. "This isn't you, Callahan. Don't let anger cloud your judgment." For a split second, doubt flickered across Callahan's face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by raw fury. Before Marcus could react, Callahan pulled the trigger. The sharp crack of the gunshot echoed through the cavernous warehouse, shattering the tense silence. Marcus's body jolted as the bullet tore into him, knocking him off balance. Pain exploded in his chest, radiating outward like wildfire. He stumbled backward, his legs buckling beneath him as he collapsed onto the cold concrete floor. The flashlight slipped from his hand, rolling away until its beam settled on a pile of rusted tools in the corner. Darkness crept in at the edges of his vision, but Marcus fought to stay conscious. Callahan stood frozen for a moment, his gun still raised, smoke curling faintly from the barrel. His breathing was ragged, his face pale and drawn. For all his bluster and anger, it was clear that Callahan hadn't fully anticipated what would happen next. Shooting an FBI agent wasn't just reckless, it was catastrophic. And now, staring down at Marcus lying wounded on the ground, Callahan seemed to realize the gravity of his actions. Marcus gasped for air, each breath shallow and labored. Blood seeped through his shirt, warm and sticky against his skin. Despite the agony coursing through him, his mind raced. He knew he couldn't let himself succumb. Not yet. If he passed out here, alone with Callahan, there was no telling what might happen next. Summoning every ounce of strength, Marcus forced himself to speak. "You don't have to do this," he managed, his voice weak but steady. "It's not too late." Callahan flinched at the sound of Marcus's voice, his grip tightening on the gun. "Shut up," he barked, pacing back and forth. "You brought this on yourself, Davis. You wouldn't leave things alone. You had to keep digging, didn't you?" Marcus clenched his teeth against the pain, trying to focus. "This isn't about me," he said, his words strained but deliberate. "This is about you, about choices. You can walk away right now. No one else has to get hurt." But Callahan wasn't listening. Panic and guilt were already taking hold, clouding his judgment. He glanced toward the exit, then back at Marcus, his expression torn between rage and fear. "You think I'm stupid?" he muttered, more to himself than to Marcus. "They'll crucify me if they find out. My career, my family, it's over, all because of you." As Callahan wrestled with his thoughts, Marcus used the distraction to inch closer to his dropped flashlight. His movements were slow and deliberate, careful not to draw attention. Every shift sent fresh waves of pain through his body, but he bit back any noise, focusing solely on survival. If he could grab the flashlight, maybe he could blind Callahan long enough to create some distance, or signal for help. Just as Marcus's fingers brushed the metal casing, headlights pierced through the cracks in the warehouse walls. Multiple vehicles screeched to a halt outside, their doors slamming shut almost simultaneously. Voices shouted commands, boots pounded against the pavement, and the unmistakable hum of police radios filled the air. Backup had arrived. Callahan froze, his eyes darting toward the entrance. The realization hit him like a freight train. He'd been followed. Someone must have tipped off the authorities, perhaps even Marcus, before heading to the warehouse. Whatever. The case, Callahan was now trapped, cornered by his own paranoia and poor decisions. Within moments, uniformed officers stormed the building, weapons drawn. They took in the scene quickly. Marcus sprawled on the floor, bleeding heavily, and Callahan standing over him with a smoking gun. "Drop your weapon," one officer barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Hands where we can see them." For a brief second, Callahan hesitated, his knuckles white around the grip of his pistol. But resistance was futile. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered the weapon and placed it on the ground, raising his hands above his head. Another officer rushed forward to cuff him while others tended to Marcus. "Stay with us, Agent Davis," one of the paramedics said urgently, pressing a clean cloth to Marcus's wound to staunch the bleeding. "Help is here." Despite the haze of pain and shock, Marcus felt a flicker of relief. Reinforcements had come just in time. As the medics worked to stabilize him, his thoughts drifted to the bigger picture. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about ensuring that justice prevailed. Even as he was lifted onto a stretcher and carried out of the warehouse, Marcus locked eyes with Callahan, who was being led away in handcuffs. There was no triumph in the gaze, only resolve. This wasn't the end. It was merely the beginning. Back. Outside, the commotion drew a crowd. Neighbors who had heard the gunshots peeked cautiously from behind curtains or gathered at a safe distance, whispering among themselves. News vans began arriving, their cameras trained on the scene as reporters scrambled to piece together what had happened. The story was already spreading, and Marcus knew it would ignite a firestorm. An FBI agent shot by a local cop? It was the kind of headline that demanded answers and accountability. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, sirens wailing, Marcus closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of rest. His body ached, and exhaustion threatened to pull him under, but his mind remained sharp. He replayed the events leading up to the shooting, analyzing every detail. The anonymous tip, the confrontation with Callahan, the arrival of backup. It all felt eerily orchestrated. Had someone known Marcus was walking into danger? Or had fate simply intervened at the last possible moment? At the hospital, doctors and nurses sprang into action, working tirelessly to save Marcus's life. The bullet had missed vital organs but caused significant internal damage. Surgery would be required along with weeks, if not months, of recovery. But Marcus was alive, and that was what mattered most. Word of his condition spread quickly, reaching colleagues at the bureau, friends, and allies in the community. Messages of support poured in, vowing solidarity and determination to see justice served. Meanwhile, Callahan sat in a holding cell, his world crumbling around him. For years he had operated under the assumption that his badge protected him, that he was untouchable. Now, stripped of his authority and facing charges of attempted murder, Callahan was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. His reputation, once a source of pride, was now a millstone dragging him deeper into disgrace. The fallout extended beyond the individuals involved. The town itself became a focal point of national attention. Activists descended on the streets, organizing rallies and vigils to demand reform. Social media buzzed with outrage, hashtags trending as people shared stories of similar injustices. Local leaders called emergency meetings, scrambling to address the growing unrest. And amidst it all, Marcus's name became synonymous with courage and resilience, a symbol of hope for those fighting against systemic oppression. For Marcus, lying in his hospital bed surrounded by monitors and IV drips, the road ahead was daunting. Physically, he faced a long and painful recovery. Emotionally, he grappled with the weight of what had happened. Yet, despite everything, he refused to let bitterness take root. This experience had reinforced his belief in the importance of his work. Change wouldn't come easily, but Marcus was determined to be part of the solution. And so, as dawn broke over the horizon, casting soft light across the quiet town, Marcus made a silent vow. He would heal, return to the fight, and ensure that no one else had to endure what he had. Justice might be delayed, but it would not be denied. The days following the shooting felt like a whirlwind of emotions and activity, both for Marcus and the town at large. News outlets across the country picked up the story, turning it into a national flashpoint. Headlines blared phrases like FBI, agent shot by racist cop, and systemic racism under fire after violent confrontation. The incident became more than just a local tragedy. It was a symbol of the broader struggle against police brutality and institutionalized racism. Security footage from the warehouse played a pivotal role in shaping public perception. Cameras, mounted near the entrance, had captured Marcus identifying himself as an FBI agent before being shot. The video showed Callahan raising his weapon without hesitation, his face twisted with rage. When the clip aired on national television, it left little room for ambiguity. People watched in horror as Marcus fell to the ground defenseless, while Callahan stood over him, gun still smoking. Social media erupted with outrage, hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" trending worldwide. For Marcus, recovery was slow and grueling. He lay in his hospital bed, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily beside him. His body ached constantly, and even simple movements required immense effort. Yet, despite the physical toll, Marcus found solace in the overwhelming support he received. Friends, colleagues, and strangers sent messages of encouragement. Flowers, cards, and gifts piled up in his room, each one bearing words of gratitude or admiration. Some came from victims of police misconduct who saw Marcus as their champion. Others were from young, aspiring agents inspired by his bravery. But not everyone rallied behind Marcus. In certain corners of the internet and within the town itself, there were whispers of doubt. A few vocal defenders of Callahan argued that Marcus had provoked the situation, suggesting he should have backed down instead of confronting a senior officer. These voices, though small, fueled heated debates online and offline. Protests erupted outside the police station, with some calling for immediate reforms and others defending the status quo. Tensions ran high, dividing families, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Amidst the chaos, Internal Affairs launched a full-scale investigation into Callahan's actions. Investigators combed through years of records, interviewing witnesses and reviewing past complaints against him. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture. Callahan had a history of aggressive behavior, particularly toward minority residents. Multiple accusations of excessive force had been filed against him, but none had resulted in disciplinary action. One victim recounted how Callahan had pulled her over repeatedly for minor infractions, issuing tickets that seemed designed to intimidate rather than correct. Another described being handcuffed so tightly during an arrest that his wrists bled. These accounts, combined with the security footage, formed a damning case against Callahan. As the investigation unfolded, Marcus found himself reflecting deeply on the events that led to the shooting. Though physically incapacitated, his mind remained sharp. He replayed the confrontation in the warehouse again and again, analyzing every word and gesture. Why had Callahan reacted so violently? Was it purely racial prejudice, or did something deeper drive him? A fear of losing control, perhaps? Marcus understood that hatred rarely existed in isolation. It often stemmed from ignorance, insecurity, or a need to dominate. Still, understanding didn't make forgiveness easier. Each time he thought about Callahan pulling the trigger, anger bubbled beneath the surface. But Marcus knew giving in to bitterness would only hinder his mission. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability and change. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. Officers walked on eggshells, unsure of whom to trust or what might happen next. Internal Affairs investigators questioned everyone, probing for details about Callahan's conduct and the culture of the department. Some officers clammed up, fearing retaliation if they spoke out. Others, emboldened by recent events, finally broke their silence. One veteran cop admitted that Callahan's behavior had always made him uneasy, but he'd stayed quiet because that's how things worked around here. Another revealed that several officers routinely joked about targeting minorities, believing they could act with impunity. These revelations shocked the community and further tarnished the department's reputation. Callahan, meanwhile, languished in jail awaiting trial. Stripped of his badge and uniform, he appeared smaller somehow, less imposing, more human. Gone was the swaggering confidence that had defined him for decades. Instead, he sat hunched in his cell, staring blankly at the wall or pacing nervously. Visits from family members offered little comfort. His wife cried silently during their meetings, torn between loyalty to her husband and disbelief at his actions. Their teenage son refused to visit altogether, ashamed of the man his father had become. Legal proceedings began swiftly, drawing intense scrutiny from the media and public alike. Prosecutors argued that Callahan's actions constituted attempted murder and a violation of civil rights. They presented the security footage, witness testimonies, and evidence of Callahan's discriminatory behavior as proof of premeditation and malice. Defense attorneys countered by claiming Callahan acted under extreme stress, believing Marcus posed a threat. They pointed to the anonymous tip and Marcus's undercover operation as factors that heightened Callahan's suspicion. During pretrial hearings, Callahan took the stand to explain his side of the story. His voice trembled as he recounted the events leading up to the shooting. "I thought I was stopping a criminal," he said, avoiding eye contact with the judge. "I didn't know he was FBI. By the time I realized, it was too late." His explanation rang hollow to many, especially when juxtaposed with the mountain of evidence against him. Even some of his former colleagues privately admitted that Callahan's version of events didn't add up. Outside the courtroom, protests continued unabated. Activists erected makeshift memorials in front of the police station, adorned with photos of Marcus, candles and signs reading that no justice, no peace. Local leaders organized town hall meetings to discuss systemic issues within law enforcement. Community members shared heartbreaking stories of mistreatment, demanding transparency and reform. For the first time in years, marginalized voices were being heard, and people listened. Marcus followed these developments closely from his hospital bed. Though unable to attend rallies or speak publicly, he used social media to amplify the message. His posts urged calm and unity, reminding followers that anger was justified but violence wasn't the answer. He also called for compassion, encouraging people to focus on solutions rather than blame. His words resonated widely, earning praise from activists and politicians alike. Slowly but surely, Marcus began to heal. Physical therapy sessions helped restore strength to his weakened body, while counseling allowed him to process the trauma of the shooting. Doctors assured him he would recover fully, though scars, both visible and invisible, would remain. Marcus accepted this reality with grace, viewing his injuries not as weaknesses, but as reminders of his purpose. Every step forward brought renewed determination to see justice served. By the time the trial concluded, the nation was watching. Jurors deliberated for 3 agonizing days before delivering their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Cheers erupted in the courtroom as Callahan was sentenced to 14 years in prison without parole. The judge's ruling emphasized the severity of Callahan's crimes, stating that no one, not even a decorated officer, was above the law. As bailiffs escorted Callahan away, Marcus watched stoically from the gallery. There was no triumph in his expression, only solemn resolve. This victory wasn't personal, it was collective, a win for everyone fighting for equality and fairness. With Callahan behind bars, attention shifted to the future. How could the town move forward? Could trust between law enforcement and the community ever be rebuilt? These questions lingered in the air, unanswered but urgent. Marcus knew the work was far from over. Healing wounds required more than convictions. It demanded accountability, education, and empathy. And as he prepared to leave the hospital and rejoin the fight, Marcus vowed to lead by example, proving that resilience and hope could overcome even the darkest moments. The verdict rocked the town and the nation. When the jury announced that James Callahan was guilty of attempted murder and civil rights violations, a collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Some cried tears of relief, others erupted into applause, and a few sat in stunned silence. For Marcus Davis, the moment was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but it didn't erase the pain he'd endured or the scars, both visible and invisible, that would remain with him forever. As Callahan was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed in shame, Marcus felt no sense of triumph. Instead, he saw this as a step toward something bigger: accountability, healing, and change. Outside the courthouse, chaos unfolded. Reporters shoved microphones at anyone willing to speak, eager for sound bites to broadcast across the country. Protesters gathered on the steps, chanting slogans like, "No more hate," and "Justice for all." Their voices echoed through the streets, drowning out the hum of traffic and the distant wail of sirens. Supporters held up signs bearing Marcus's name, hailing him as a hero who stood firm against injustice. Meanwhile, a smaller group of dissenters muttered under their breath, accusing the system of bias and claiming Callahan had been made a scapegoat. The divide was stark, a reflection of the larger societal rifts that had fueled the tragedy in the first place. For Marcus, the days following the trial were a blur of media appearances, interviews, and heartfelt messages from strangers. People sent letters thanking him for his courage, sharing their own stories of mistreatment by law enforcement. Many expressed hope that his ordeal would spark meaningful reform. Others simply wanted to let him know they were praying for his recovery. The outpouring of support touched Marcus deeply, but it also weighed heavily on him. He knew he wasn't just representing himself anymore. He had become a symbol of resilience and justice. That responsibility was both humbling and daunting. Yet not everyone celebrated the verdict. Within the police department, morale hit an all-time low. Officers whispered anxiously about whether they'd be next, whether years of unchecked behavior would come back to haunt them. Some doubled down on defensive posturing, insisting they were being unfairly targeted. Others grew introspective, questioning whether they had turned a blind eye to wrongdoing for too long. A few even resigned, unable to reconcile their beliefs with the growing demand for transparency and accountability. The department was fractured, its leadership scrambling to restore trust while grappling with internal dissent. In response to the mounting pressure, city officials announced sweeping reforms aimed at addressing systemic issues within law enforcement. These included mandatory bias training, body cameras for every officer, independent oversight committees, and stricter protocols for handling complaints of misconduct. While activists hailed these measures as steps in the right direction, skeptics argued they were superficial fixes designed to placate public outrage without addressing deeper structural problems. Marcus watched the developments closely, offering cautious optimism. "Change takes time," he told reporters during one interview. "But if we don't start somewhere, nothing will ever improve." As the town grappled with its newfound infamy, Marcus focused on his own recovery. Physical therapy sessions became a daily ritual, each exercise pushing him closer to regaining full mobility. At first, progress was agonizingly slow. Simple tasks like walking upstairs or lifting objects left him exhausted and frustrated. But Marcus refused to give up. With grit and determination, he pushed through the pain, drawing strength from the knowledge that his journey inspired others. Friends often joked that his stubbornness was unmatched, but Marcus took it as a compliment. After everything he'd been through, quitting wasn't an option. Emotionally, however, the road was harder. Nightmares plagued Marcus, replaying the shooting over and over in vivid detail. In his dreams, Callahan's face loomed large, his voice dripping with venom as he pulled the trigger again and again. Sometimes Marcus woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding, struggling to shake the images from his mind. Counseling helped, providing tools to process the trauma and manage anxiety. Still, there were moments when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm him. During those times, Marcus leaned on his support network, family, friends, colleagues, who reminded him he wasn't alone. Despite the challenges, Marcus found solace in reconnecting with the community. Once cleared by doctors, he began attending town hall meetings, listening to residents share their fears, frustrations, and hopes for the future. He spoke candidly about his experience, acknowledging the pain and anger many felt while urging unity and patience. "We can't undo the past," he said during one gathering, "but we can shape the future. Together we have the power to create a system that works for everyone, not just some." His words resonated deeply, earning respect even from former critics. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. Community members started participating in discussions about police reform, offering input on policies and programs. Activists partnered with local leaders to organize workshops on conflict resolution and cultural sensitivity. Schools introduced curriculums focused on diversity and inclusion, aiming to instill values of empathy and understanding in the next generation. It wasn't perfect, and progress remained uneven, but the seeds of change had been planted. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to work part-time, easing back into his role at the FBI. His superiors offered him desk duties initially, allowing him to contribute without straining his still-healing body. But Marcus missed the fieldwork, the thrill of piecing together clues, the satisfaction of solving cases. So, when doctors gave him the green light, he jumped at the chance to resume active duty. His first assignment back involved investigating another case of alleged corruption, this time in a neighboring county. Though nervous about stepping back into such volatile territory, Marcus approached it with renewed vigor. If anything, his experience had sharpened his resolve to root out injustice wherever it lurked. Callahan's imprisonment continued to cast a shadow over the town. Behind bars, he struggled to adjust to life as a convicted felon. Gone were the privileges of rank and authority. Now he was just another inmate, subject to the same rules and indignities as everyone else. Letters from his wife grew less frequent, and visits dwindled to none. His son refused to answer his calls, blaming him for tarnishing the family name. Isolated and bitter, Callahan spent hours replaying the events of that fateful night in the warehouse. Had he acted out of fear, anger, prejudice? Or was it something else entirely, a toxic mix of arrogance and entitlement that blinded him to reason? Whatever the truth, Callahan couldn't escape the reality of his choices. They haunted him, day and night. Back in the town, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as possible under the circumstances. The protests died down, replaced by quieter but no less determined efforts to drive change. New leaders emerged, young voices unafraid to challenge the status quo. Old wounds began to heal, though scars remained as reminders of lessons learned. And Marcus, once an outsider thrust into the heart of turmoil, became a permanent fixture in the community. People sought his guidance, trusted his judgment, and admired his unwavering commitment to justice. Looking back, Marcus realized how far they'd come, and how much farther they still had to go. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that required constant vigilance, compassion, and courage. As he stood beside activists and allies at a rally months later, Marcus felt a sense of pride, not for what he'd accomplished alone, but for what they'd achieved together. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, hope burned brighter than despair.